Hello and welcome to episode 167 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Dexcom and Omnipod. You can use the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com to find out more about both of these great products. You can also type into the browser if you want, myomnipod.com/juicebox or dexcom.com/juicebox. Quick note, this is episode 167. 168 also went up at the same time. So if you don't have it, check for it. It is my Dexcom G6 review with the Senior Vice President of R&D from Dexcom, Jake Leach. So it's not your average review show. It's way better. We dig deep into a ton of stuff. Just go get it. I promise. It's really good. Today's episode is with Lisa Poole. Lisa's Juniper's mom. You might know Lisa from Instagram, where she runs an incredibly vibrant and exciting page called T1 Junebug. Let me just leave a little silence here for all you T1 Junebug fans to maybe hoot and holler a little bit in your car. Go ahead. Woo woo. This episode is really cool. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, about management style and type 1 diabetes in general, and a little bit of Juniper and Lisa's story. But also, Lisa at some point moved Juniper to a low carb lifestyle and then moved her back from it. So you're going to get to hear about that entire experience. Being diagnosed, eating regularly, then going low carb, then coming back from low carb. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast, of course, should be considered advice medical. Otherwise, always consult a physician before making changes to your medical plan. Here is Lisa. T1 Junebug.
Super early here where I am, so hopefully I don't sound too tired.
What time is it?
Yeah, it's 6 a.m. here.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. It's not like we get sleep anyways.
Oh my God. I feel terrible.
No. I usually get up at 6 anyways, but I got up at 5 and grabbed a coffee and left my house because it's noisy in my house.
Oh, no kidding. Oh my gosh.
You're good. I am Lisa Poole. I have 5 children. My youngest daughter is Juniper. She has type 1 diabetes. She is 5. She'll be 6 in about 3 weeks.
Okay, Juniper's 6. How old's your oldest?
5.
Oh, 5, almost 6, excuse me.
Right.
How old's your oldest?
My oldest is 17. I have 2 boys, 15, 17.
Wow.
And I have 3 girls who are Juniper, 5. Addie is 8, and Penelope is 10.
Oh my gosh, very nice. That's a lovely family. I have to ask right off the bat from my experience with the podcast, are you a Mormon?
No.
Okay. Every time someone comes on here, they're like, they have like 9,000 kids. I'm like, you're a Mormon, right?
Right. No, we don't live in Utah. We live in San Diego. We had 2 kids, and then we had 3, and why not go for 4? And then we had 5, and we're like, wow, we are crazy. Like, it is total chaos.
I think the weather must be too nice there or something. You need some you need some like depressing months or something like that where everybody just looks at each other and like, no, thank you.
Right? No, they are great kids, but they're there's always something.
Yeah, no kidding. So Juniper's she's diagnosed when?
So she was diagnosed right after her 2nd birthday.
Arden was exactly the same. We were about 3 weeks after her birthday, I think.
Yeah, we were about 2 months after her birthday.
Okay. Wow.
Not on our radar at all, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's on anyone's ever.
Yeah. No one's like, you know what I think's coming this year? We're going to get that sidewalk fixed and someone's going to get diabetes. Right. So, right. No, I hear you. Did it present in the basic ways?
Looking back, it was all very clear symptoms, during. It was probably like a 2-week buildup where I look back and the symptoms are crystal clear.
Yeah.
But it was summer. It was August. It was really hot out, and I was like, she's drinking a lot. And that just kind of kept increasing. And then she was sleeping in our bed with us still, and she would wake up in the morning and her pajamas would just be soaked. Like, she would soak through her diapers. And I thought, she needs some bigger diapers, and she's outgrown that size. So we got bigger diapers, and she continued to do it. And I think it was the night before she was diagnosed, she woke up just crying for water and drank an entire sippy cup of water, like in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And still, it didn't quite click that something serious was going on. The next day, I remember we went to Starbucks because you need a lot of coffee with 5 kids. And all my kids wanted to get a hot chocolate. And June sat there and chugged a hot chocolate, which was another, like, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the day she was diagnosed, my husband took her out of the house to go visit some friends. And so I had a quiet moment to Google some of her symptoms. And that's when it all started to kind of come together. But I still, she was playing and acting healthy, and she didn't look sick. She was kind of cranky, but, 2-year-olds are cranky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and plus you have 5 kids. You must have thought one of them's going to be a clunker personality-wise. Maybe it's just her. Yeah.
She was always pleasant, but I thought, I wrote everything you can write off as something else. Like the crankiness. I was like, she's teething. She's not sleeping well. It wasn't until the night before we went to a back-to-school event for my older kids, and she was crying for water, and they had food trucks, and so I'm searching for water, and they've sold out of water. And so they have this like little juice soda thing that I thought, okay, my 3 girls can share it. Mm-hmm. And June just sat there chugging it, and another lady noticed, and she said, wow, she is so thirsty. And that's when I thought, that's, when someone else is noticing that your kid is excessively thirsty, maybe there's a problem.
Yeah.
So I started Googling and, had that quiet moment. And it just was not on my radar that my 2-year-old could possibly have diabetes. But I called her pediatrician anyways, and I told the nurse, I said, these are her symptoms. I don't feel super concerned, but I feel like maybe we should see what's going on. And she didn't seem super concerned. And we were going into a holiday weekend, so it was a 3-day weekend. And we couldn't make it into the office before they closed. So she said, just come in on Tuesday morning and we'll see what's going on. And thank goodness the doctor called me back after the office closed. It was about 5:30. And he said, I would just feel a little better if you would just take her to an urgent care near you and ask them to check her blood sugar. And I was like, okay. And we still not really concerned. I left. We had just arrived to the pool because it's the middle of summer with all 5 kids and my husband. And I said, I'll be right back. I'm just going to run her down the street. It was literally like a mile away.
Yeah.
We're going to get her checked out and we'll be right back and we'll come swim.
And there was still no part of you that was like, don't put the other 4 kids in the pool just yet, just in case.
No. They were already swimming. I was like, I don't want to ruin your fun. We'll be right back. We arrived at urgent care, and I could tell the doctor there seemed like I was a little bit wacky. Like my 2-year-old looked fine. She was not acting sick, but she humored me and said we would check her urine. And she was still in diapers, so they put like a little collection bag in there so they can test. And she came back, and her whole demeanor had changed, and she didn't say anything about the test. She just said, so we're going to do a finger poke and just see what that says. And so they did a finger poke. They actually did a toe poke.
Right.
And the meter just read high.
Yeah.
And now they're scrambling around looking for the pamphlet that comes with the meter to see what high even means. Because I don't think they had ever seen that. And I knew that was bad. I had no idea what a blood sugar reading should be. But I knew it shouldn't be high.
Was it, I remember saying on here once, and I think I've said it here, but when we did it with Arden's, we ran out and bought a meter, and the high was HI, like it was, the screen was so small.
Right.
And I literally, when it happened, I thought, oh, how cool is that they make the meter, like say hello to you before it tells you what your blood sugar is. And I kept staring at it going, now when's the number coming?
So I thought about going to buy a meter, but I thought, I don't know what a blood sugar, I'm not going to know how to interpret that number because I had no clue.
Right.
And so at that point, she said, so your daughter has type 1 diabetes. We think we want you to go straight to Children's Hospital. So I gathered up my kids from the pool who were still wet and dripping, and we threw everyone in the car and dropped them off at their grandparents' house and got her down to Children's Hospital. And they were waiting for us. And once we got there, I could tell how serious things were. The mood was definitely, went from she's totally fine to she is not fine. her blood sugar was over 800 when we got admitted. So yeah, we spent the next 4 days there. We talked him into letting us leave a day early because our other kids were starting school and we didn't want to miss their first day of school.
Yeah. Wow. But, your story is so incredibly similar to ours.
I've heard you tell Arden's story, and a lot of similarities.
That really is. That's I don't want to. It's. I don't know what it made me sad, like when you were telling it, but it wasn't for you. It was for me. I'm empathetic while we're talking. I was like, oh, this reminds me of a bad part of my life, and everything you said, step for step, makes sense. Like the idea of writing off things that are right there in your face because it could be something else. That's such a normal thing.
It's easy to do, and the symptoms aren't talked about, I don't think, nearly enough. And so I really had never heard any of the symptoms or the fact that my 2-year-old could even get diabetes. I think there's a huge lack of awareness for people who are not connected to the diabetes world somehow.
Of course, yeah.
That, like what symptoms to even look for in a child, which is why I'm always trying to share. And unfortunately, we had a friend who later on was diagnosed, and she recognized some of those symptoms because we talk about them a lot and try and share. And I just, there needs to be a change in the amount of awareness that's out there and people actually looking for those symptoms. But
we did an episode a few weeks ago with Beyond Type 1, and they're really pressing to get posters and information into pediatricians' offices, and they're having really good success with what they're doing. So
right. I listened. Cool. That was amazing.
That was really cool. So you get out of the hospital in a couple of days, you ship your other children off to school, and what's the next step? Like, how do you begin? Because it's only 3 years ago, right? 3-ish years, maybe a little more ago.
Right. So this summer will be 4 years for her.
Right. So what did they send you home with? Did you have was it needles? Was it pens? What did they give you?
So we had needles. They sent us home on 3 different insulin. She was doing Lantus, Novolog, and NPH. That was not fun. So for a 2-year-old, she was on a very strict eating schedule. Mm-hmm. So she really freaked out in the hospital, like any 2-year-old would. She really hated the shots. It took a couple of us to have to hold her down and do the shots, and it was horrible. Mm-hmm. And so I think their thought was, with the NPH, we can eliminate a couple of the shots during the day. And so she had very strict eating schedules. So she had to eat breakfast at 7, and she had to have a morning snack at 10, and then she had to eat her lunch at 12, and then she had an afternoon snack at 3, and then she had her lunch at 5, and then she had an evening snack.
Yeah.
For a 2-year-old who before this was allowed to just snack when she wanted to, she always would just kind of snack through the day. It was really hard. I remember the first week home, all the other kids went to school, and she wanted a banana, which she had been able to eat the week before, and I had no idea how to dose for it, and it wasn't time for her to eat. And so she laid on the ground and cried for 45 minutes, and I literally did not know how to make that happen for her.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that a strict eating schedule for a 2-year-old was such
a good idea.
Such a fun idea.
No, I was just at something this weekend where people were speaking, and some people had diabetes for a long time, and this one person described the same idea of I had to eat at certain times and certain amounts of food, like one starch, one carb, one this, like there had to be fat in it. It was actually Curry Sparling. She writes a blog called 6 Until Me. It's a really popular diabetes blog. And she said that there was supposed to be a certain amount of fat in her diet. And if her mom couldn't figure out how to get the fat in her diet, she would just give her a tab of butter and make her eat it.
Oh, my God.
because of the same thing I think you're describing, like that, how do I make this happen the way I'm supposed to? And that kind of insecurity and not knowing. Yeah.
Yeah, on top of it, each meal had to be a certain amount of carbs. So each meal was supposed to be 45 carbs.
Wow.
Each snack was supposed to be 10 carbs. And I remember telling them in the hospital, this is more food than she eats now. Mm-hmm. And so we were trying to add extra carbs to her food. And we would dose her before, and then she would eat only half. And so then we'd have to make it up with juice. And I remember it being really stressful trying to like we were forcing extra carbs in her.
Yeah. Your whole day.
And
was
then when
about
she
this,
wanted
wasn't
to
it?
eat a certain amount of carbs, she couldn't because it wasn't the right time, or it didn't fit into her food schedule. So after we were home, we did that for a few weeks, and they actually had us calling in every single day for almost the first 2 weeks. We would call in at night and tell them what her numbers were, and then they would make adjustments to her insulin because she was all over the place. I pretty much figured out by the end of the 2 weeks they were just guessing what the amount should be. But they kept lowering it, and she was having a lot of really scary lows. Remember our first week home, I wasn't supposed to test her yet. You know, I'm still only testing her at the times they tell me to test her, and she wouldn't act low, and so she was playing, and I decided to test her. I think she would tell me when she was that little, she would say, "I'm so tired, Mama." Mm-hmm. And then I would know, like, oh, I better test her. And so she was 32, and she was just playing like nothing. And so very quickly they rushed getting a Dex on her, which was a really good move for us.
Yeah.
But she had a Dex on within a month of being diagnosed.
Well, that's fantastic. But but what you described first, I want to go back to that idea of like, okay, you know, inject this much and give us a call because we don't know what we're talking about. And then hey, why don't you try this? Like, you know, when somebody starts saying, why don't we try this? You're in trouble. And
they're just guessing.
Yeah, right. And you picked up on it really quickly, which is good for you.
It took me a while to learn that I could make adjustments and that I would know her better than they ever would. And it took me a while to figure that out, that they really didn't know any more than I did.
What was the barrier to making that decision, do you think?
For me deciding that?
Yeah, like what do you think held you back? Like the first time you had the thought, what do you think held you back from just making the decision and making, you know, adjustments on your own?
I just don't think it occurred to me that that's what we could do. Mm-hmm. I think once I realized that they sounded like they were guessing, I thought, well, I could guess too.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I'm here,
you know? So
I might have a little more idea.
But, you know, I look back at the stuff they sent us home with, like her ranges, they didn't want her going to bed unless she had to be over 180 to go to bed. Oh. So if, say, she was 150, they wanted us to give her a snack before bed. To me, I've never seen blood sugars. I don't know what I'm looking at. I followed them for a short amount of time, thinking that was normal, and definitely realized at some point that was not normal, and we do not go to bed at 180 anymore.
And that was just a fear decision.
I think for them, they wanted to keep her safe, and that was safe, but really it's not.
Right. It's safe today, not safe, let's say.
Right. It's don't let her die tonight.
Right.
But it's really healthy for her body. So the interesting thing about her is after about each week, the insulin levels kept going lower and lower. And after about 5 weeks, I ended up taking her off all insulin completely.
Oh, okay.
She kept having so many lows that it just kept decreasing and decreasing until they pulled out all insulin. So no Lantus, nothing. And like the second they did that, I ran with it and we switched to low carb. And I figured if we can, however long we can keep this going, the better. Like, you know, for a 2-year-old to even have a few days of not having to get shots seemed very appealing to me. Mm-hmm. So we switched to low carb, and she stayed off all insulin for 8 months.
Wow. So that her honeymoon was really long then. That's something.
It was long, and I think we prolonged it with the foods we ate, and yeah.
How did she do with that at that young age? Like, what are some examples of foods she would eat that were low carb?
So for her, I don't know that she knew much different. The whole family started eating that way. I would bake a lot of foods. We would make stuff like with almond flour and coconut flour and stevia, and I try and make her treats and like a lot of nuts and few berries. We cut out a lot of fruit. Now looking back at it, it looks and it feels really restrictive. At the time, it worked, and to me, the trade-off was you eat these foods and we don't have to take a shot. So it worked at the time.
Well, the whole thing had to be incredibly overwhelming for you because you're describing. First of all, you have, I forget now, 43 kids, and you have a lot of children, and other responsibilities on top of those children, and now she's eating at certain times, and that's not working, and then all of a sudden she doesn't need insulin anymore, and you go to this low carb, and you're baking and you're cooking, and did this encompass most of your life?
Yes, I pretty much lived in the kitchen, which at the time it felt worth it.
Sure.
Honestly, I mean, it seems silly now, but everything I wanted to read everything, and family and friends were sending me information about how the cure is like right here. Like, if we can just make it a little further, like the cure is any day now. I don't live like that anymore, and but in the beginning, you kind of hold on to this hope that maybe this won't be your life forever.
Yeah. No, I completely understand. I really do.
Yeah, I kind of had this feeling that if we can keep this going for a while, then and maybe she'll never have to go to shots again. They'll have this cure by the time, her honeymoon ends, and it'll just be that easy.
Yeah. I don't know, how was it crushing when you realized that wasn't what was going to happen, or did it just kind of kick you into another gear of we need to take care of this in a different way? A little of both, maybe.
I think it was gradual. While she was off insulin, like low carb was the answer, and going back to why we chose low carb, going out there and searching for support. I ended up finding some Facebook groups, and it seemed like there was two sides to the Facebook groups. Mm-hmm. So you had the one more mainstream where you had people saying, I just let my kid eat whatever they want, but then they would show their graphs and the numbers would be insane, and I would think, I don't want that.
Right.
And then I found the low carb groups where they were really restrictive, and this is what they eat and they don't eat, but their graphs were beautiful.
Yeah.
And so with the information I had, I felt like those were our only two options. It wasn't an option to let her eat whatever she wanted and have good blood sugars. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I knew as much as I wanted her to be a kid and eat what she wanted, I didn't want her to have these wild, horrible blood sugars. And to me, I didn't realize that there was another option, that she could eat other foods and have good blood sugars at the same time. So you do what you do what you can do with the information you have at the time. Mm-hmm. And so those, to me, it felt like were the only two choices.
No, I understand. So I don't know. I've never looked into like a low carb option for Arden, but I did find something online recently where this person was saying, here, look, this is my kid's horrible graphs, before we went low carb, and here's my kid's graphs now. And just as you described, Rocky Mountains on one side, the other side was like 86 and perfect the whole day. Right. And I thought, okay, I see you're, first of all, probably picked the best graph you've ever had and the worst graph you've ever had to make your point. But I understand still the point is valid, right? If you restrict carbs enough, your blood sugar is not going to go up much if you're using insulin. But all it made me feel like was, like, listen, if this is a choice, I don't care. Like, let me be perfectly clear. If you don't want to eat carbs, I don't care. But don't say this is what diabetes is with carbs when you clearly don't understand how to use the insulin to stop that from happening. Because then that's a disservice to people, because then you give them that feeling of either or. It's either horror or it's joy. There are no other options. And that's what you saw, right? Which was, right. It's one or the other. It felt like
those were,
absolutely.
It was like those were our only options, was have horrible blood sugars and let her eat whatever she wants, or have really good blood sugars and have a very strict diet.
Yeah.
I didn't see that there was another option really until I started listening to your podcast.
Oh.
And it just kind of opened my eyes to, like, hey, maybe we can eat like we did before we were diagnosed and have good blood sugars at the same time, because I'm not willing to put her health at risk just to let her eat different foods.
Yeah, well, certainly.
But if I can do both, let's do both. Let's eat normally and have good blood sugars, and that's what we do now.
Absolutely. That's so cool.
Much better. I spend much less time in the kitchen.
Well, first of all, I am glad for you, and I'm thrilled that you found this out. I'm a little extra mushy about it because I literally just got back 2 days ago from giving a talk to a room full of people, and this is what we were talking about. I love that you found it, and I love that it's helping you. But I'll say that it's just a sad. Oh my God, Arden! I texted her that I wanted her to bump her basil and her and bolus a little bit, and she didn't see it. So I waited like a long time, and I resent it again. And she goes, "Dad, a human can't possibly answer in that amount of time." I think she doesn't understand that that there was a large gap of time in between when I sent it the first time and she didn't answer. So anyway, sorry. Yes, a human. As she gets older, her responses get more thoughtfully jabby. So, I'm sorry.
I look at my teenagers daily and think, I hope they don't get diabetes, because that'd be a whole nother challenge.
Yeah, right. Because their perspective is so different, and I know the same thing. Like, my son's 18, and even though he's been around diabetes pretty much his entire life, he wouldn't be like, oh, okay, I know what to do. He would be one that would like go kicking and screaming. So.
My son too.
Yeah, and I get it, by the way, but.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, but I'm sorry, but to go back to the idea of, I find it heartbreaking to think that you felt, or that other people feel caught in that situation. Like that there's, because I would do the same thing, by the way. If I thought that, I would feed Arden, dust I scraped off the countertop with salt sprinkled over it, if I thought that was going to keep her healthy for the rest of her life. You know what I mean?
This is how some of the foods might taste.
Yeah. I don't want to say, but I've had a couple of those, and wow, holy God. And listen, I could use less carbs in my life. We all could. I think on one level or another. But there's a difference between lower carb and no carb. Like, no carb is, like you're talking about, like almond flour, nuts, like you're talking about, stuff like that. Like, this is a very specific diet at that point. Right.
And it limits a lot of your options. Like, we would avoid a birthday party because, oh my gosh, they're going to have cake there. And it got to the point where I didn't even know how to dose for those foods, even if I wanted to give them to her. Mm-hmm. I think the further down the road you go of low carb, you're dosing for such tiny, tiny amounts of carbs, if you're even dosing at all, that the thought of dosing for like a piece of birthday cake, like, I didn't even know how to do it.
Right.
So it took a lot of experimenting in the beginning, and we're still learning.
Oh, sure.
But, different foods, I try and look at it as, like, I remember one of the first not low carb foods, we went out and met some people, and she had pizza, and I think she might have hugged her pizza. Like, you could tell it was like the best thing she had ever eaten, which made it totally worth it. But her numbers were not great after. But instead of thinking I failed at this and we're never going to eat that food again, I just took it as a learning experience for what to do differently next time.
That's amazing.
And most of my learning experiences were I need to dose more. There was a lot of fear in the beginning of dosing such large numbers when we had not been dosing like that before.
Yeah.
So to dose for 5 carbs, which might be something we did before, now we're dosing for like 45 carbs in it.
And the disparity
the
disparity between the amounts of insulin was probably shocking, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
And those first few times felt really scary to dose that large amount. But the more we do it, the more comfortable we are at figuring out what dose works for different foods and how much she needs. And, each time we just learn a little bit better how to dose better for that.
Let me ask you, how long ago did you start listening to the podcast? I love finding a suspenseful place to put an ad. Actually, I got this note one time from this one person who was really mad. And it's like, yeah, I'm always listening, and then something gets interesting, and then you cut it off and put the ad in. I think of you every time I do that. I don't know who you are. I don't remember your name, but I remember this. Suspense bothers you. All right, that's enough. I used up most of the ad on that. I might have to start the music over. Hold on. Today's first ad is all about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor, specifically the G6. In the very next episode, episode 168, you're going to hear a 45-minute long conversation. It's my review of the G6 plus conversation with the Dexcom Senior Vice President of R&D. I think it's really insightful about how and why the G6 is, in my opinion, a leap from the G5. But for now, all you need to know is this. If you want to know where your blood sugar's at, where it's going, and how fast it's going there, if you want to be able to see that remotely for your loved ones, if you want to be able to make the kinds of decisions that you hear us talk about on this podcast every day, decisions to keep blood sugar stable and low, take away spikes, and if a spike comes, make dealing with the spike easier. If you want all of that data, all of that information that helps those decisions be so easy and painless, then you really do want the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. You can go to dexcom.com/juicebox. You can click on the links in the show notes. You can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on the links. But one way or the other, you need to get yourself some more information about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor. And those are the ways to do it. Most of the things that I accomplished with my daughter's type 1 diabetes, with her A1Cs, which at this point now are 4 years of 5.6 to 6.2, I could not accomplish those things without the Dexcom and without the Omnipod. But the ad today is about Dexcom, so let's focus on that. Dexcom.com/juicebox with the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Do it. You will be happy you did. Let me ask you, how long ago did you start listening to the podcast?
Maybe a year and a half ago.
Okay. And you're still figuring it out, right? I mean, plus she's still small. It's, I mean, 5 or 6 years old is, what do you, I mean, I'm guessing.
She's tiny.
50,
she's
40, 50 pounds?
She only weighs 38 pounds.
Wow, okay. So she's, yeah, so little bits of insulin have a big impact on her. She doesn't have a ton of body fat to distribute the insulin with and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a slog, right? Trying to figure it out all the time. But I love what you said about not giving up and just taking, hey, this is what happened, and now we'll just make an adjustment for next time. I have to say, it made me smile when you said it was like she would almost hug the pizza. I was like, that's
oh my gosh,
great.
She had an extra piece that she wanted to bring home with her, and like she had to hold it. She didn't even want to put it in the box to bring it home with her.
She's like, no one's taking this from me.
Yeah. But it was at that same time that I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to give her these food issues of like she needs to hoard her food because she might never eat pizza again. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that a lot when we first switched over. Like she was so excited to eat a certain food that she had never had before, or it had been a really long time since she had. And I don't see her doing that anymore. Like it's just not as big of a deal when we have a treat or she gets to go get an ice cream or whatever, which is what I want. You know, I don't want her to have any kind of food issues. I remember one of the first podcasts I listened to that you had was a lady who came on and you guys discussed diabulimia. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my gosh, I do not want her to grow up with any kind of food issues or just any issues with food.
Yeah.
So that was a big changing point for me of I need to figure out how to dose her and get over being fearful so that she doesn't think any differently of food.
There's a give and take in there. I mean, there's going to be times where I go through it, you know, periodically too. We put a pump on yesterday that just must not have been a great place for it. And it took a while for it to start working the way I wanted it to. I don't know if it was in a muscle or, you know, too close to a muscle or something, whatever. And so I adjusted the insulin and we're good now. But first number of hours, it wasn't great. And we came up on a meal and I was fighting with like this 150 blood sugar trying to push it down. And then the meal came and I was like, okay, I'm pretty certain this isn't going to go well, but I'm not going to ask Arden not to eat this food. So I just gave her, you know, I over bolused and I covered it the best I could. And eventually it broke and I got her blood sugar back to where I wanted it to be. But I think it would have been much more dangerous to create a conflict with the food than to let her blood sugar be 180 for a couple hours. Like, that to me is a trade-off it's worth making.
We run into that a lot being 5 years old. Sometimes she doesn't have the patience to wait for a pre-bolus like I would like to all the time. And so it is a balance of like, just eat it and I'll figure out the blood sugar and maybe I'll increase your basal or I'll figure out a way to make it work, but just go ahead and eat it.
Yeah.
And, hopefully as she gets a little older, there's a little more understanding of maybe waiting a few minutes or getting the timing better. But it's tricky when you're 5 and you don't want to wait for that snack.
Yeah, you're like, how about now? There's a couple, you can get away with under pre-bolusing and over bolusing. You know what I mean? Like trading extra insulin for less upfront time. But there are some foods that are just, it doesn't work as well. Like you can't make that trade-off with a bowl of cereal. For instance, that'll cause a low later. You'll have to use so much insulin up front to stop, Apple Jacks from doing something like that later you will get low. But for the most part.
Thankfully, when it's a meal, I can sneak in the pre-bolus before she even knows she's waiting, as I'm making the food or after we order the food. And then when it arrives, she can just eat. And to her, she didn't wait at all.
Right.
I got the pre-bolus in and it all works out great. It's usually with a snack, which tends to work out better anyways without as big of a pre-bolus.
That's interesting. And you're making me think of a story someone told me this weekend. So I wish I knew who told me this now. I spoke to so many people this weekend. But somebody was telling me they had a friend with a toddler and they'd pre-bolus the meal. But one time the pre-bolus got out of whack and the kid started falling before the meal was done. So she gave the kid ice cream, like an ice cream sandwich or something like that.
Right.
And then the kid figured out, right, like this is how I can get ice cream. And it became like an issue. And so you're saying that you can get away with pre-bolusing a meal because the meal's coming, but snacks, if it's just a snack, there's no cooking time for the snack. Like, okay, you push the buttons, now give me the thing in the package or the banana or whatever it's going to be. That's really kind of interesting. What kind of pump do you have? Is it a pump? It is.
We are on Omnipod.
So but she knows when you can't do it without her noticing, I guess.
Oh, I can. She doesn't pay attention.
Just pay attention. Well, that's
I'll dose her and she doesn't even really pay attention to what I'm doing.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Sometimes I have to ask her to come closer because she's over somewhere playing and it won't read that far. But usually she's not really paying attention to what I'm doing.
I wish you all could have seen, like, for people who have Omnipod, you have to be with a reasonable distance of the pod to use the PDM, right? And, I
feel like we have to be so close.
Well, some days, I'll tell you, the pump that Arden was wearing last time, I felt like they had to be touching. And the one before that, I can stand in my dining room and do it through the floor up into her bedroom. So it's like, some of them are, different. Maybe it's where they're shielded on their body. I have no idea. But what I was going to tell you is that many, many, many years ago, we were contacted by Omnipod and they were working on the new PDM, which at this point now is the old PDM that's about to be replaced. And they asked for Arden to come down and fill a pod and do everything. They were just they needed data on little kids using the PDM for the FDA. Right. So Arden goes down and she does it. And the guy setting up the thing goes, hey, do you want to see something? Look what they've done with the distance. And he took the pod, walked out of the conference room we were in, down the hall, went into another conference room, pushed the button, and he said, go ahead, now deliver a bolus with it. And it was working like 40 feet away. And I thought, oh, God, this is amazing. And then when it got back to the FDA made them restrict it back down to a closer distance. And I was like, ugh.
Bummer.
But I got to see it for one afternoon, and it would have been really cool. I don't know why the FDA made them do what they did, but I have to admit it would have been great if it worked at distances like that. Yeah. So, anyway, I'm sorry I got off on a bit of a tangent. They made me remember this very happy moment where you could bolus from anywhere in the house, because at that distance, I probably could have set temp basals from my bedroom. And
oh, that'd be perfect.
That was exciting to me, the idea of not getting out of bed. But okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So so when you look back on low carb in your experience, and you look at how happy she is to have things that are not low carb, is it a flavor thing, do you think? Like, what do you think is the difference, really?
It tastes better,
White flour, fat, stuff like that.
Carbs taste good.
Carbs do taste good. You're right.
They do. I think part of it is just the freedom thing of like being able to go out if we want to, or like, hey, let's all go get an ice cream, or like having the piece of birthday cake at your friend's birthday party. Just the freedom to, like, I'm not scared to dose for any food that she wants to eat.
Yeah.
Within reason. I don't let her eat birthday cake for breakfast, but
sure.
It just the freedom of being able to, we're not scared of food, where I think there was some fear before. Like, I don't know how to dose for that, or we can't eat that. And now there's just that new freedom of, we're not held back from food or what the food options are.
I always worry, like, my bigger, like, concern is, and maybe it's unfounded, I have no idea, but if you spend your whole life eating that way, and, insulin is just this thing you give in tiny little bits, and you don't, to your description, don't really know how to bolus for other, items with more carbs in
right.
it. What happens when your kid becomes an adult or goes to college or goes away for the weekend and everybody's like, I'm eating pizza, and they're like, I love pizza, I think, let me try. And then they are wildly unprepared for how to manage that food with the insulin in any way.
Right.
Like, I think you should understand as much as you can about diabetes, because it's easy as a parent to look at your 5-year-old, and you have more children, and you have an older child too, but when you have little kids, and just little kids, there is a time in your life as a parent where you have this very unreasonable expectation that you are building the exact person that you mean to be building, and that they're going to launch out into the world exactly as you mean for them to be, and it doesn't really work that way. Like, you're building a foundation for a human being. They are then going to leave your house. Immediately, the bright sunshine of freedom is going to hit them, and they're going to start making their own decisions. Hopefully, they'll make them sort of in line with the things you've been telling them, but it is unreasonable to think they're going to continue being your 8-year-old for the rest of their life, which, by the way, is not something you would actually want to begin with, even though it feels like it's what you want when they're 8.
Right.
Yeah.
But having a 17-year-old, I could not more clearly understand what you just said.
Yeah.
It is so, they're going to become their own person, and they're going to do what they want. Yeah,
and they need tools, right? So they can't, everything can't be, and you can break it down. Forget low carb. It could be anything. I'll tell you right now, my son's 18. He's going to leave for college in, gosh, if I cry, don't hold it against me, May, June, July. My son's going to leave for college in less than 4 months.
Wow.
He's going to go to his school, and he's going to play baseball there. So he's been talking through social media with all the other boys who are coming in on the baseball team. And they're all trying to get to know each other. But moreover, they're trying to find roommates. And my son comes to me about 2 weeks ago, and he says, I think the guys are all getting ready to, pick roommates. Like, I have to figure out who I want. Now, what do I know how my son's going to do? Like, my son's not a drinker. He doesn't run around and party, all this stuff. Like, he's a pretty, and I know people think, oh yeah, you think that, but you're going to have to trust me on this one. My son's, this is who he is. And so he comes to me one day after school, and he's texting with this kid. He goes, I think I found my roommate. He goes, we agree on religion and politics, and he doesn't drink either. And I was like, now the part of me who thinks that I might be able to launch my 8-year-old into the world exactly the way I want him was like, I'm winning. I'm so winning right now. But still, that doesn't mean that's, I don't mean to say that 6 months from now, my kid's going to come home with a fairly horrible drinking problem and a heroin needle in his arm. I don't think he's going to go that far. But to think that he's going to get through college without ever wondering what a beer is a little unreasonable, and so I've given him both sides of the conversation, not just the side that I want him to stay in. And I think about that with the low carb, you can't not understand insulin. And if you're just, listen, I've had days when my daughter's sick and she doesn't eat. Diabetes is really easy if you're not taking in carbs. It's, it's super easy actually. And so,
except when you're sick, and then it just throws that whole curveball of diabetes doing what it wants to do.
Too low, can I tell you? I'm very lucky. Arden doesn't get low when she's sick. So it's just dumb luck on our side. Like when my daughter gets a head cold, I'm like, ooh, 4 days off from thinking about bolusing, because her blood sugar stays incredibly steady and she doesn't need as much insulin for reasons that I don't understand in any meaningful way. But I get lucky.
Juniper just spent 5 days in the hospital because she had a tummy bug, and
she couldn't keep anything
her
down.
Blood sugar, even if she would eat, she wouldn't absorb anything. So, you don't feel like you're like eating when you're throwing up.
Yeah.
But she would be throwing up, and then I would have her eat something, and she would eat 50, 60 carbs, and she would still be in the 50s.
Wow.
So we had her basal turned off by 85%, and she was still like in the 40s, 50s. So they had us turn her pump off completely, which was not, I don't think, the best idea.
Yeah.
And I even told them that, and so we did. And then, of course, by morning she had large ketones, and she was in the beginning stages of DKA, even though her blood sugar was in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent 5 days in the hospital where they could have glucose in her IV, and it was the only way we could keep her blood sugar up.
Yeah. Oh, that sucks. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But she says they had really good chocolate pudding, so it was okay.
Can you imagine how easy it is to buy off a 5-year-old?
She's like, if we could go next time to the hospital and I don't get the IV, I'd be totally cool.
Yeah, just the pudding, and
just
then we roll in and out real quick. I'm sorry. I know that does happen to a lot of people where you just, like, Arden has bouts where her blood sugar will hit 50 and, it won't come back up. It feels like no matter what you do. But these are a handful of times a year, and it only lasts for an hour or so. Like, we don't have, like, that kind of... but I know a lot of people do. That was by far the worst we've had. But, it happens sometimes. Isn't it funny, too, like the situation that you got put in? Because when they said shut the pump off, you're like, that's not a good idea. We always need insulin, even if. And yet you felt like, I'm assuming there was just no other option at that point. Yeah, I think it was like, here's your last option before coming into the hospital. And let's give it a try. I knew it was not a good idea. Yeah. But at that point, I couldn't turn her pump back on either because I couldn't get her out of the 40s, even while she was eating. Right. So we couldn't give insulin. So once they got the IV and the glucose running, then we could give her some insulin because she had the glucose in her IV. Yeah. It all balanced out. Yeah. Well, maybe that's a little bit of function of her size, too, and her age. And yeah, maybe being a little bigger will help you with that. And plus, there is this other thing, too. Like, we've only ever experienced what I think is, it wasn't DKA in the way that was told to me by a doctor, but we had a pump failure overnight one time. And Arden woke up in the morning and she gets out of bed and she's like, I don't feel good. And I'm like, okay. And we test and her blood sugar is in the 300s, but it's not overly high. But still, I'm like, this shouldn't be. So I look at the pump, and the cannula, like, kinked or something, or I don't remember what it was, but put a new pump on, got insulin going, and she was sick to her stomach. And I said to my wife, I'm like, in the amount of time I think this has been, she's gonna have to go to the hospital, like this, and checked her ketones. Her ketones were out of whack. And my daughter's like, I don't want to go to the hospital. Is there anything I can do to avoid going to the hospital? I said, okay, if I give you a couple bottles of water, I need you to drink them. I'm going to bolus an incredible amount of insulin. And when it happens, and it's going to happen, your blood sugar is going to fall. When you're not feeling well still, I'm going to absolutely need you to have to force some food in to catch this. I said, if you think you can do that, then I'll try it. And she was old enough to make that decision, like, I will eat when I'm sick. You know what I mean? But if she was younger, she would have never, I couldn't have even had that conversation with her. You know what I mean? Like, and she definitely wouldn't have been able to choke past it, because drinking the water almost killed her. Like she was drinking that water and she was like, oh. And I'm like, look, we can just go to the hospital. She's like, I'll drink the water. And I'm like, okay. I actually had a very similar conversation with Juniper. In a life where so much is difficult, something needs to be easy. Something needs to be an oasis. I think the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump is that oasis in a desert that is type 1 diabetes. To be able to get your insulin delivery, to be able to control your rate of basal insulin without being tethered to something, to me is huge. I know when people think about moving to an insulin pump, the first thing they think of is, I don't want to be attached to something. And Omnipod keeps you from feeling attached because there's no tubing, there's no device that you're tethered to, nothing that you have to wear on your belt or jam in your bra or something like that. It's just this little tiny pod that just adheres to your skin and it's got everything it needs right inside. I think that's nice. I think that it's nice for something to be easy and just work. Right? Don't you need that sometimes? Don't you just need something to just do what it's supposed to do it well, and do it without being a burden? I feel like that all the time. Just sometimes you're like, oh, can't something just go the way it's supposed to? Well, the Omnipod will go the way it's supposed to. And you know what? That's saying a lot for a medical device. It does what they say it's going to do. It does it well, and it does it without burdening you. Go to myomnipod.com/juicebox or click on the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com, and Omnipod will send you out a free, no obligation demo that you can try for yourself. You don't have to believe me. You can actually hold it and decide for yourself.
I actually had a very similar conversation with Juniper. So she had been sick for about 2 days before. And each time she would not eat or drink something, I would have to have the talk with her. Like, we're going to have to go to the hospital if you can't drink this juice because we cannot get your blood sugar up. And she would always choose like, okay, I can power through. I'll drink this. I'll eat this.
Right.
And it was the morning that we went into the hospital where she was like, I can't. And I was like, we're going to have to go to the hospital. And she was like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
that's how you know she really can't.
I was like, okay, yeah, that's the sign we need to go. Right. So, even being at 5, she was making those choices, and she definitely reached the point where she was like, I'm done. Can't do it.
Well, that's pretty heady for a 5-year-old to just be like, okay, I've tried, and now I'm done. And I guess it proves, I guess they do grow up too quickly when they have diabetes for sure. Hey, are you from California originally?
I am.
Do you say what? I feel like I'm saying water incorrectly when I'm speaking to you. My kids have,
I love the way you say it.
Yeah, my kids have made me completely mental about a couple of words from the Philadelphia East Coast area. And I'll say it and they'll be like, you mean... So I live in a place, it's like a meeting point in between a bunch of areas. And because of the kind of businesses around here, it draws people in from a lot of different areas. So my kids don't have the Philly accent that I grew up with.
Right.
And, things like sports, like, where I grew up, people watched the Eagles play football. You didn't watch another team play football.
Right.
But around here, people are Giants fans. They're, some people like this, they like that. Cowboys and Patriots are like that kind of an idea. And my kids are not thrown off by that. I'm like, as a child, we would have beaten those children for liking a different football team. And so it's the same with dialects. There's dialects coming in from everywhere. And now my children know to correct my bad pronunciation. And now
funny.
I think about it now. And the podcast
Our kids are always...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Our kids are always so quick to correct us if we...
Yeah, it's not nice. And the podcast is incredibly popular in California. As a matter of fact, I think if I had to... If you want to take a detour for a half a second with me, I think of all the states in the United States, it is, I think, the most popular in California, and I don't know why that is exactly. It's interesting, but it is true. I'll use just this month, right? Do the last 30 days, and I'll look real quick. Far and away. I'll say maybe triple the next closest state in downloads. I wonder. I don't know if it's the sheer size of California, or if I've always wondered if it's if there's more progressive thinking that I can never figure out exactly what it is. Like when you share your idea with another person with diabetes, if they're like, "Hey, right on, I'll give that a try." Whereas if that happens somewhere else in the country, people are like, no, it's not what my doctor said, and I'm not going to do it. I always wonder what it is, if it's just the sheer size of the population or or if there's something more
That's true.
a sensibility that's different, maybe. Anyway,
that is an interesting thing. Trying to move away from listening to what your doctor suggests or tells you to do. I think that takes a while to figure out that you know best.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had an interesting thing happen when June was in the hospital a couple weeks ago. And I battled a little bit with the night nurse who came in, and the things he wanted to do was just not acceptable to me. He was going to check her blood sugar every single hour with a finger poke, and I was like, she has a Dex on. Like, why are we doing that? And there was a few other things, and so we definitely had some words. And the doctor came in the morning, and I thought she was going to scold me for
sticking up for yourself.
The nurse. Yeah. And instead, she came and she was like, "That was really awesome what you did. Like, that is so needed. You have to advocate, and you're going to know your kid better than anybody. And in order to keep your child safe in a hospital like this, you have to be a strong advocate for them." And I think that is so important, and something maybe people don't realize, that they're going to know their child better than even the doctor sometimes.
Yeah, and for adults with diabetes, just the same.
Right, anyone. But, our kids who need us to be the advocate for them, and we do know them best. We're with them 24 hours a day, and I handle all of her diabetes care. So that was interesting. I was glad I was not in trouble.
Good for you. No, I think, listen, I advocate for that on the podcast all the time. Like, you absolutely have to just speak your mind without acting like a lunatic, because it's easy for people to discount you if you seem crazy. So, and plus you have to realize the situation you're in. You're in the hospital because something went wrong with their diabetes. You're like, listen, I'm really good at this. And the person's probably thinking, are you? Because you're at the hospital. And
what's interesting when you go to the hospital, at least with the children's hospital we go to, is every doctor that we end up with, they come in after already looking at all of our A1Cs. So they came in and she was like, "You clearly know what you're doing. You're handling everything well. Like, we can see the circumstances that you're here for this reason. And, we're going to let you have control of her diabetes while you're here. That's not why you're here." But I do think they see a lot of kids who are not well managed, and then they have to take over. So they could see that we were in a situation where they didn't need to take over her diabetes management. It was just that we needed that little extra help with the IV.
That's great.
So they let me still do, like, I'd handled all the dosing. And
yeah. Isn't that it? That's incredibly, that's an incredible insight into the process, because because they felt like they had I guess for the lack of a better term, they had a report on you, and that report proved out that you must at some level know what you're doing. And so they felt more comfortable allowing you to keep going with it.
Right.
It's funny because
they came in and they were impressed with our A1Cs. So that was good.
I do a similar thing with 504 plans at school. Every year we have a meeting. I take a minute to thank the school for their flexibility because of what it leads to for Arden's health. And I show them, numbers. I'm like, look, here, this is, here's normal. Here's where she is. This is due in large part to because you're allowing me to manage her the way we do through text messages while she's at school. Right. And just giving them that idea that the way they're treating me is benefiting Arden. It makes they feel empowered. It's because it's interesting because in the way we do it at school, I've taken all the power away from them, but they still feel empowered by it because the result is so good. Like I've talked them into believing that their decision is better than their action. And it's true, but I show it to them. I think you did a similar thing. Maybe they checked on you first and you didn't know, but I think it's good for other people to know that you can say, look, this is an anomaly. Most of the time this is our understanding of it, and we need to be involved in the decision still. Yeah, it's a great point. I'm glad that came up, actually.
So while we were mentioning A1Cs, I just wanted to tell you, or anyone listening, that, we managed a really good A1C with low carb, but we are now eating anything and everything and still have a really good A1C. So for me, I didn't think that was a possible thing in the beginning. And it is. It's just about understanding how to actually use insulin. And you can eat anything. It's just not with the tools that they gave you in the hospital. The tools they give us in the hospital, and then we walk out and we try and let her eat normal foods, and she would be 400 later, and then we can't correct for 3 hours, and it was a nightmare. Having the right tools, like the Omnipod and the Dex, and then having a really strong understanding of how the insulin actually works, you can eat what you want and have a good A1C. It doesn't need to be one or the other.
I appreciate you saying that. Can I ask you, and you don't have to give me numbers, but what's the disparity between with carbs and without carbs, the A1C? Like, what's the gap? Like, I don't need to know you went from 5 to 9 or something like that, but what's the difference, like the number difference between the two?
It's minimal. So her last 3 A1Cs have been 5.9. And when she was low carb, she was about 5.0 to 5.1. So we're not perfect. We're still learning with different foods, and it's still, I don't know if it's because of her size. Sometimes it's not totally predictable, but we do our best, and I know how to correct if things don't go right. Or I've definitely learned to use temp basals in the past year or so, which is a game changer.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's huge. Like, we figured out, like, pre-bolusing when we go out to eat is really tricky with her, because she can, the timing of it and trying to time the food is tricky. And, we've done it before where the food doesn't come out in time, and then dropping with double arrows, and we've got to, like, quickly find some other food for her to eat before her food gets there. And it throws everything off. So now we'll use a temp basal sometimes, and I'll like increase the temp basal by 100%
to get her blood sugar moving without bolus.
Get it to start moving without actually giving her a pre-bolus first. And then as it gets closer to where I feel comfortable, like, all right, the food should be here in a few minutes, then I'll dose her. But then I feel comfortable that I can shut that off if, the food takes 45 minutes and she's dropping too quick, I can turn it off.
Lisa, you are my proudest moment so far. Like, you really took to the information, like, really well. It's so commendable. I have a question for myself, I guess, but I have 2 questions. So going back to what you said first, can you explain to people that while your daughter's eating carbs, your graph is not perfectly flat like it used to be with no carbs? Am I right?
It is not.
Right.
I mean, when we were eating low carb, we had a perfect straight line most of the time.
But now there's some spikes, you get them back quickly, and you still have an A1C of 5.9.
Exactly.
Yes.
We try and keep those spikes down using temp basals and pre-bolusing, but it's not perfect with a 5-year-old. Like I was saying, sometimes she doesn't have the patience, or she wants to eat right now. And, we work around that, and having the right tools, like being able to, I don't know how you could do this without a pump, but having the tools like a pump to be able to do the temp basals. We use temp basals every day.
Yeah.
And it helps so much with controlling those spikes, or if we see she's starting to trend low, we can decrease. But we use our temp basals every day. That's been a game changer for us, and I just didn't understand how to use those, and really until I started listening to your podcast.
Cool.
And a lot of it is just experimenting, like not being scared to try it out. And the thing with temp basals is you can always just shut it off if you feel like it's not going the way you want it to go.
Yep.
I'm a lot more bold with a temp basal because I can shut it off at any time.
Right.
So if I'm not sure about bolusing a huge amount, I'll start with the temp basal. I'll do a mix of the two. But no, we don't have perfectly straight lines. But if we do spike, we come down fairly quickly. Like the other day, we had a huge spike. She was playing and she pulled off just part of her pod, and we didn't realize it. And she kept rising, and I was bolusing heavy, and she just wouldn't budge. And I finally looked, and I could see that the cannula had pulled out a little bit. But it wasn't a crazy panic moment. We fixed it. She got a new pod on. We bolused heavy. We set a temp basal, and she was back down in range within a pretty short time.
That's excellent.
There's not such panicky moments anymore. We know how to handle everything.
Yeah.
And it's just learning to be comfortable with trusting your skills and using the tools you have. Like I hear so many people who have pumps who don't use temp basals because they just don't understand them or they're scared of them. And that is such a great tool to have and not use. Yep.
It was my first thought when I got a pump was like, wow, I could be in charge of the basal insulin finally.
I mean, at night we've been using them Like if I see her start to trend down, and I can oftentimes catch it before she actually has to eat something in the middle of the night, which is huge.
Yeah.
I'd much rather just like shut it down and not have to be feeding her in the middle of the night. It doesn't always work, and sometimes we still have to feed her something. But
right. I tried last night. So I two examples of tempos basals in the last couple of days. One was Chinese food where I didn't think Arden looked as hungry as she was. So I thought she needed 11 units for the Chinese, right? So I normally would just give her 11 set up in some sort of an extended bolus and, work it out. But instead I gave her like 8 of the units, and then I doubled up her basal for like an hour and a half to make up the other 3. And sure enough, like 40 minutes into this, extravaganza with the Chinese food, I was like, she didn't eat as much as I thought she would. And I just shut the basal down.
Right.
And it was perfect because the insulin wasn't in yet. And yet we were still being aggressive up front, and it didn't result in a spike. And it was really a really good example of using it and then being able to shut it off. Last night, I did not, I get sick in a very strange way. I don't feel well a couple times a year. Then I fall asleep, wake up 5 hours later, and I'm well again, much to my wife hates that about me.
My husband is the exact same way.
So I traveled this weekend. I came downstairs last night. I was doing the laundry last night because that is my job. And I came downstairs at 8 o'clock, ready to watch the Sixers game, which they lost. So luckily I didn't actually watch it. And I came down into the living room where my wife was, and I took a blanket and I jammed myself into the corner of our sectional, and I said, I'm either going to be okay in a little while, or this is where you're going to find me dead. And I covered up, and she's like, whatever. And
whatever.
Whatever. And Arden had a little bit of a peak when I was out cold. And my wife's really getting it, but she's getting it slower because she's around it much less. Right. And so she had a little bit of a peak, and she got to come down. Well, when I woke up at midnight, completely healed, by the way, when I woke up at midnight, I kind of took over, and I looked, and her blood sugar was 72, which I was thrilled with, but you could tell she had been drifting down over a number of hours very slowly. And I looked at the 72, and I was like, all right, I'm going to shut her basal off for a half an hour. I think I can catch this and get her back into like the 78 range. And I'll tell you what, a new piece of technology kicked in. So we have the G6 now, the G6 from Dexcom,
I'm
right?
Jealous.
You should be a little, and I'll tell you why. So I shut the basal off, and it's a little bit of a crapshoot at that point. Like, I wonder if this temp basal is going to work because I got to it a little too late.
Right.
And diagonal arrow down, 66 diagonal down. And that's a moment where I still would have gone back before with G5 or before. I would have said, let me wait a little longer. And what would have happened is that little longer would have turned into 61 and then 55 and then a low. But instead the Dex beeped and said, I forget exactly how it puts it right now, but it said that you will be at 55 sometime in the next 20 minutes if you don't.
Right. I've seen that.
And I was like,
low.
I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I went in and I gave her like 3/4 of this tiny juice box, and boom, 65, leveled off, went to 70, 72, 80, 100, 102, I think, and it leveled off like 20 minutes later. And I was like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. Yeah. And so now it's just like feels like another tool, you know what I mean? Like another weapon to get into a fight with. And it worked so well. I was like, wow, that's fantastic. So I'm going to talk more about the G6 at some point when I have a little more time with it. But
I cannot wait to hear about it. We've got our order in. We're all approved. We're just waiting.
I hear June. This will be out afterwards. So I can say I think they're going to start shipping more around June 1st. And then
that's what they told me last week.
They'll be coming after that. So, pretty hot and heavy.
We're looking forward to it.
It is pretty cool, though, I have to say. And I'm actually going to, to go back to what we talked about even when you're really in good control, you see peaks during the day. I'm actually going to put the G5 on myself and wear it for a while just to see what it looks like when you don't have diabetes. Because
I've worn June's Dex before, and it was interesting to see what a working pancreas looks like.
Did it stop you from eating any specific foods?
No, I kind of wanted to challenge it and see how.
You challenge your pancreas, you mean? You're like, can you handle this?
Yeah. Let's see what you're going to do with this.
I'm incredibly amused by that for reasons I don't completely understand.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Your pancreas held up.
Yeah, I did.
It's fantastic. Well, Lisa, we are over an hour. You were fantastic, and I really appreciate you saying this, because if the low carb people hear this, they're going to kill you. So,
oh yeah, we've been banned from some low carb groups already.
Did you try? So let me ask you before we go. Once you saw the other side, did you feel like this compulsion to go back and go, "Oh my God, it's not true," and then they kicked you out?
No, they kicked me out before that.
I see.
Did you see them eating pizza? They are banned. It's a little. I hate to say it. I met some really nice people on those groups, but it's a little cult-like. And for a while it was like, this is the only way, but you'd like step out of that cult culture, and it's not. And I do wish that I could, that they would look and see like it is possible to eat how you want to eat and have good numbers. I think there's a lot of fear in dosing such large numbers, and there's a lot of thought that, well, it's safer to do it this way.
Yeah.
And I feel confident as being her caregiver that I am watching so closely all the time that she's not in danger. I can always, like you always say, I can bump and nudge things, and I don't feel like she's in a dangerous spot from eating normal foods.
Right.
Yep. It's not a dangerous thing to dose the amount of insulin that she needs. And it takes a while to get to that point. But yeah, I've been banned from some of those groups, and that's okay.
They came after me once. I think I mentioned what was in Arden's lunch once, and then I got hit pretty hard. But I'll say it again here in case you're listening. Today, it's a grab bag of Cheetos, a full-size bagel, a bunch of grapes. How many? I don't know. Let's see what else. Oh, thin Oreos. I don't know exactly how many. I just grabbed what appeared to be about 2 inches of them. And what else is in there? There's a carrot in there, and a mixed fruit cup, but low sugar. Something else.
I like the carrot for good measure to like counterbalance the Cheetos.
Cheetos and a carrot. You should see how this kid is. She's built like
your orange foods covered.
Yeah, she's built like an Olympic athlete. She's just little, and she's not little anymore. She's getting bigger, but she's very muscular, and I must be doing something okay. She's incredibly healthy. So
I think you're doing very well.
Yeah, thank you. and so and how much will I give her for it? I have absolutely no idea. I'll just wing it, throw some in. If it's not the right amount, we'll do more. If it's too much, we'll do less, and we'll just stay really fluid with it, and it's going to work out great.
Now, that is the other thing I have taken away from you that I have to tell you. Thank you. We used to measure everything. I mean, everything was so precise, and it still wouldn't be correct, right?
Right.
Now it's so much more. I don't measure anything anymore. It's all based on like the type of food she's going to eat, like how active has she been today? Do I think she's going to eat it all? There's no more measuring, and that's really nice.
For people listening, if you would all just figure out what Lisa's figured out, I could stop doing this podcast, and I would get a lot of my free time back. So everybody, please, whatever she did, you do it too.
It's nice to not be so compulsive and anal about measuring every single like gram of food.
I have a hard enough time measuring food.
Because you know what? I measure, and then she's not going to eat it all anyways, or maybe she's going to want more. And
but did you throw it back on the scale?
Roll with it. Yeah. Like especially with a 5-year-old, you don't know how much they're going to eat. Like, start with a certain amount, add more if they eat more.
Yep.
It used to be like I'd kind of panic if she wanted extras, and like you got to be able to roll with it, and having the right tools is huge, and being able to do that, being able to just add a little extra insulin or increase the basal or decrease it. Like if she didn't eat all of her food, it doesn't need to be like a panicky moment.
I hope that it makes you feel better that the reason I was able to pass that on to you is because that used to be my life. Like I was like, I'd measure something and then she wouldn't eat it. And then you were measuring back what she didn't eat. And then like, how do I make up for this? And it's all just nonsense. But that is really,
you're like, I measured that out precisely. You need to finish that.
Yeah, and it didn't work anyway, right?
Like, I'm not hungry.
Yeah, I started my talk this weekend by looking out at a really nice group of people, a full room, which I was, by the way, for anyone who was there, thank you, because I saw some people speak to empty rooms, and that's a horror I would not want. But so I started out by saying, it's this type 1 diabetes thing. It's all about understanding the insulin. It's all about timing and understanding the insulin. Once you've got that, the rest of it just falls into place. And I'm just really thrilled that it worked out this way for you.
Yeah.
And
not being scared to experiment and try it. Yeah. Don't look at it as a failure, but a stepping stone to doing better next time.
I'm totally grateful for you coming on and saying this. I hope people understand that I do so little interaction with people who even want to come on the podcast that all I know is, like Lisa told me, she's like, I want to talk about life after low carb. And I was like, cool, that'll be good. I genuinely didn't know she was going to say that the podcast helped her with it. You probably don't believe that, but it's true. And I just thought it was interesting to hear from somebody who ate low carb and then didn't. But this is.
Well, I'm pretty sure we've officially been banned from any low carbs we hadn't groups that we had not been banned from before. But
well, I have a Facebook group you can come on, Lisa. It's fine.
All right. We have our own Instagram page. We have plenty of friends there.
Yeah, you'll be okay.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And staying on extra time. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Cool. I couldn't agree more. I'm always grateful when someone comes on and shares their story so completely and honestly. Lisa definitely did that today. I want to shout out to Juniper. Hey, Junebug, what's up, kid? Thanks for letting your mom come on the podcast. Thank you so much to Dexcom and Omnipod for sponsoring the show. myomnipod.com/juicebox, dexcom.com/juicebox, with the links at juiceboxpodcast.com. We're in your show notes. Hey, you know what? I'm on Instagram too. Lisa can't have all the Instagram followers. I deserve some too, right? Check me out for the podcast at Juicebox Podcast and for my type 1 diabetes blog at Arden's Day. But you can also check out what Lisa's doing too and everything that Juniper's up to. She does a lot of cool stuff for a little kid. I put a link in the show notes for their Instagram. T1 Junebug. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for sharing the podcast. Thank you for rating the podcast. Thank you for being a part of the podcast by helping to build the community that the podcast thrives on. I'll be back next week with another episode.